Hi, friends. Welcome to Digging Deep, a podcast brought to you by Motivo, where we unearth stories that bring us closer. I'm Rachel, joined by Dr. Carla, and together we are going to explore our shared experiences and what it means to be human.
We'll have conversations with clinicians, activists, and everyday heroes who share their wisdom. These discussions challenge our perspectives and ignite a spark for positive change. We'll explore love, loss, resilience, growth, and the power of human connection.
And we'll do so with humility, knowing that we are not the experts, but simply fellow explorers seeking to learn alongside you.
Digging Deep is more than a podcast. It's a community. Let's learn, grow, and support one another. So grab a cup of tea, find a cozy spot, and let's explore the heart of being human. Welcome to Digging Deep.
Hi.
Hello. It's always good to see you.
So good to see you too. How was your 4th of July?
It was good. We spent most of the time in bed as Kimmy was sick, but it was a good way to relax. What'd you do?
I went to the beach with my brother and sister-in-law and their 2 kids, and it was not relaxing. We went to Busch Gardens, the amusement park, and my niece was like, "Can we go again in a couple of weeks?" I'm like, "I'm going to need an entire year before we go back again," because amusement parks are of the devil, I think.
Vacations actually with kids are not actually vacations for the adults.
They're not. They're definitely, they're trips, right? I've heard someone say that. They're trips.
They're trips. Yep.
Yeah.
You're just working in a different place.
Well, this is a good segue, honestly, into the topic for this week, because I was just with my family. You've been a lot with your family here recently, having moved to the place where you're from, where your family lives now.
Yeah, the area.
Yeah. So maybe I can just give a little bit of background first of what we're going to be talking about, the topic of going home again. And it's so let me share a little bit of where this originated from with our listeners. Dr. Murray Bowen, who is actually one of my favorite kind of pioneers of the therapy profession. I always was very drawn to him during grad school, and some of his writings have been really instrumental in my life. And he was actually one of the first people to talk about this idea of multi-generational family therapy. And so he is a psychiatrist. He was treating patients who suffered with schizophrenia. And what he learned over his time treating them was that involving the family, particularly involving the mother, was really helpful to the patient getting better. And I think about this even in terms of one of my good friends who has a company called Equip, who does eating disorder treatment, and same sort of concept here in treating eating disorders, that it's a family illness oftentimes, and it's something that bringing together all elements of the family can really help pinpoint some of the underlying issues of how things develop. So he pioneered this idea of multi-generational family therapy, meaning involving the family into counseling. Sometimes that looks like having the family actually there, but oftentimes it looks like simply talking about what happened in your family of origin, what were some of the family rules and roles, either spoken or unspoken, that helped kind of you develop into the person that you are. So one of his interventions that he would tell his clients, he would instruct them to go home again, which means that they would go home and practice being in their family of origin, but to try to be neutral from an emotional reactivity place, which is super hard. I haven't mastered that. But how can you go home and notice some of the patterns in your family system and just be an observer of it and think through, either practice how you can set boundaries in that place, or how you can kind of maintain your own kind of sense of mental health and healthy mentality, even in the midst of it. So that was kind of the intervention. I always think about that concept of going home again. It's something that we all do most of the time. You know, most people do some element of this sometime in their year, either for the holidays, maybe on a regular basis. So we want to talk through that a little bit. But I was thinking, Carla, you might want to differentiate a little bit between, you and I both have LMFT after our name, stands for Licensed Marriage and Family Therapist. It is this concept of working with a family system. But what did those other initials mean behind people's names? You want to share some insight on that?
Yeah. So, I'll add when it comes to working as a marriage and family therapist, couple and family therapist, relationship therapist, that there's this notion that, nothing occurs in a vacuum, right? So, if we are looking at experiences of anxiety or, a trauma response, that we can actually connect that to patterns within the family. And family therapists are usually kind of able to quickly orient there and ask questions about those patterns. I think, counselors have a more generalist counseling kind of background with a great deal of flexibility in where they want to specialize during that graduate training. A lot of programs have, where counselors can specialize in family counseling or school counseling or career counseling. There are these multiple options there, and then I think in addition, for social workers, there's also this great deal of flexibility in practice settings, but in training there's this heavy dose of social responsibility and advocacy as clinicians. So as we are providing services, what are the places where social advocacy have to be a part of the role that we play in people's lives. So those are kind of the general differences. I think that there's also, differences that people are able to create in their own experience, with whatever license they have.
That's exactly right. Yeah, it's so true. I mean, I think sometimes even the letters behind people's names are somewhat, uh, you know, um, irrelevant in the sense that, like, all clinicians, LCSWs, licensed clinical social workers, licensed marriage and family therapists, licensed professional counselors, kind of ebb and flow through lots of different ways of thinking about things. But for some reason, our profession has chose to have three different options for people, but they pretty much all do the same thing in terms of level of education. They all have about 2 years of supervised experience and a master's degree. So, anyways, one other thing I'll say about going home again is that, I think this is a statement that we can almost all relate to, that spending time with family can rekindle unresolved feelings of confusion, bitterness. I would add resentment to that as well, or longing. I think longing is a good one too, of just thinking through like what I wish was different about my family.
Mm-hmm.
And that oftentimes those unresolved feelings can manifest as anxiety or depression or self doubt or definitely communication struggles. There's a lot to it. I find it to be starkly different than hanging out with my friends,
Right.
chosen, and then hanging out with my family, where there's just a lot more stuff that comes.
Mhm.
Anyway, what
Yeah.
are your thoughts on that?
I think even that difference can occur, even just like where you are, right? So, the places where we've called home can be different. We experience them differently, whether we are in, connection or, actually in the presence. That's what I want to go with,
Mhm.
of family or friends. So I want to start our conversation by just kind of like, sharing where we've called home and the places that have raised us. So, where have you called home?
Great question. So North Georgia is where I'm originally from, right under Chattanooga, Tennessee. Town's called Rossville, Georgia, and that's where I was born and raised. And went to college. So I was there from birth to till I graduated high school. Went to college in Johnson City, Tennessee, at a small liberal arts Christian school. for 4 years there. And then right after college, my boyfriend at the time, Warren, who's now my husband, he had majored in film and got a job at DreamWorks in Los Angeles. So we moved across the country. Oh my gosh, as like, 21-year-old, something like that. And I slept on his couch for a couple of months and then became a live in nanny for the next couple of years and went through grad school during that time. And then we stayed out there and lived there for 7 years and then decided to move back home. So this going home again really hit me hard in 2011 when we moved back to Chattanooga. Now we live in Richmond, Virginia, which is where Warren's family is from. So I would just kind of categorize it as I went from an upbringing that was pretty black and white. It was very much like this is, it was very religious, but not like overwhelmingly so. It was still, I had a very nice childhood. I didn't experience trauma or anything like that in my childhood. Felt very loved and cared for by my parents. But I think I had a very small view of the world in terms of differences, people who didn't look like me, people who didn't come from the same background that I came from. So Los Angeles changed all of that. It was like I was kind of dropped into a situation where I mean, one, quick story that I'll tell is that when I was a live-in nanny for a Jewish family, and my upbringing said there's only one way to believe. Like there's the right way, and then there's what everybody else does, right? And so, I was kind of faced with this decision to be like, okay, I grew up learning that there's one way to believe, in a higher power, etc. And then here I am with the most loving, generous, wonderful family, accepted me as their own. We are still super close to this day. And I had to really kind of like deconstruct that a little bit of like what I was kind of taught, and then being able to be around people that I'm like, oh, well, wait a minute, that doesn't line up with kind of the more black and white way that I grew up thinking. So we'll get into those topics a little bit more, but that's what it was like for me. I'm curious for you, like, what are some of the places that raised you?
Yeah, I mean, you talked about kind of that shifting of home and like what it meant to even just be exposed to, others' differences and how that impacted you. I, from a pretty early age, was exposed to people who were different than I. Grew up in Toms River, New Jersey, which is right on the shore. Jersey Shore was recorded about 10-15 minutes from where I live.
Did you
And
know Snooki, or what's her name?
I
Skookie?
did
Is Snooki?
I did not know Snooki. I also, fun fact, did not actually watch the show. It was just
I
too
never
much of
watched
a reminder of
You
of
didn't want to go home again every week on TV.
I did not, especially not with that show. But that just kind of gives an idea of where everyone came to, summers and holidays, they came to where I lived. So then went to college at Rutgers University in New Brunswick, and had, which was like maybe an hour and a half away from home, but just like felt like I was able to have the freedom to just create a completely different just environment, and more connected with friends, more connected with people, like my chosen people that I wanted to be around. And then moved sight unseen to Athens, Georgia, by myself, no family in close proximity at all. Everybody was in the Northeast, and I decided to go to a social work program in what I consider to be the Deep South, and culture shock. I think I didn't necessarily even know what that meant until I experienced it, like the shock of such an extreme difference. And then, stayed in Athens for a year, moved to Atlanta, where I stayed for another 16 years. And,
Wow.
just kind of created my chosen, home and the spaces that I really wanted to learn about myself and others. And then just 3-4 months ago, moved back up north to Maryland, where I am about 20 minutes away from my sister, and my parents still live in New Jersey. So back around family, back home.
Brings up a lot of stuff.
Fun times.
I really
Um,
do.
Yeah, so that is not only a little bit about us, but I think that it also shares just even quickly like those cultural shifts that have such an impact on our experiences of home, what we miss, what we like don't miss so much,
Mhm.
and the ways that those patterns, like we recreate patterns when we are away from home, and
Yes.
then we actually have to go, back into the patterns that or the roles that we may have had. So I'm curious for you, what role did you play in your family?
Mhm.
You are always, really clear about your role in the family. So I want everybody to know about that. And how does that show up for you now?
Yes. Okay. I would say in two words, my role was the favorite. Like I needed to be the favorite, right? I wasn't necessarily the favorite, but like I aspired to be the favorite. So a lot of what that looked like. I have a brother and a sister. My brother's like 18 months older, my sister's 15 months younger. They've never really gotten along even as kids. Like they didn't fight a lot. They were kind of indifferent to each other. For me, I was like, I will be the favorite forever from now until I die. Like, how can I mold myself into whatever it is that you need from me? So I paid attention to like what my brother needed from me as a little sister, and I did it to a T. My sister, for some reason, I mean, my mom was a great mom, and she could totally handle taking care of three kids. For some reason, I took it upon myself to mother my sister, even though she was only 15 months younger than me. I could anticipate her needs. To this day, I can anticipate her needs. I know exactly what she needs, and I like hold myself to the standard of like, the amount of time and money and effort that I put into the holidays is like pretty ridiculous. And it's not even like you might look at it and be like, oh, wow, you're so generous. But it's not, I don't think it's generous because it's really about me, is what I've noticed. It's about like my need for you to affirm that I am really important to you. And like that, I think that that's just like the role that I assumed. Nobody asked me to, nobody like needed me to. There wasn't like this big gap in the family that I had to step in and be the parentified child. It was more just like I wanted to. And then as my parents started to have marital trouble, I kind of stepped into this role of like, just kind of like holding on to like the emotional caretaker, I guess I would say, of the family. Again, I don't know that necessarily people asked me to do that. I think it was just like I saw that I could do it and I could handle it. And so I stepped in and did it. And so then I think how it looked in, later is that like, I can remember in college and then in my friend group in California, I have this need to be like the ringleader of a group. I can remember like walking to lunch or, in the like the dining hall in college together. And like I needed to be like in front. I don't know why, but I needed to be like leading the charge. Like I didn't want to be just another person in the friend group. I wanted to be kind of front and center for whatever reason. That led to, oftentimes like ostracizing friends that were like, because in order for me, this is what I've learned, in order for me to be the best and the favorite, other people have to be less, right? And so
Yep.
there's this like superiority piece that I find really unattractive in myself of like, it's hard for just everybody to be on even playing field with me when it comes to like my family or my friends. And I just, if I were them, I would not find that very fun to be with. Like, I feel drawn to like people who like are willing to affirm my position as like the favorite, now that I'm saying it, I'm like, that's fucked up, Rachel. Like,
Well,
you should really
you're my
do
favorite,
something
so
about
it
that.
works. You are my favorite, so it works.
Oh, I am your favorite?
You
Oh,
are,
thank
you are. I mean, I feel like that it makes sense as, a middle child, right? But then also, your siblings were so close. I mean, there's also the side that I want to highlight of what you said of like being able to assess and, take care of people's needs. And while that maybe because you want to be the favorite, there is also this like, caring part of you that you also learned to do for, from your family, but also your friends as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting that you say that because I'm thinking like what is it? And I think that it's a bit of like a survival technique of like in order for me to feel like that I can cope, I
Mm,
this is how I have learned to operate in the world. And so I think that what would be interesting from this is to take this back to my therapist and ask them like to help me kind of walk through like what happens if I'm not the favorite? Like what am I afraid is going to happen if I'm not the favorite?
mm,
We won't go there through
yeah.
this because that's like turns into a
Yeah.
therapy session. But I'm curious for you, what role did you play?
So I am the youngest of everybody. So my dad had 6 girls, and my mom had 2 boys and a girl, 2 girls, and I am the youngest of everybody.
Of everybody.
Well, of everybody. So, I am the one who is, I rebel. I, say whatever comes to my mind. And there's always space for that because, oh, that's just Carla. They probably turned me off and didn't listen, which we'll talk about in therapy today. But, I do think that, I was the one that was like, that's not right. And I'm going to say it. And then I'm not going to do it either because nobody's really paying attention to me anyway. Um, and so, I think that I also was the one that was just kind of like left to my own devices. I had a 3rd grade teacher, Mrs. Bubblewitz. She would shout out to her if she's listening. She told my mom that I'm just going to be who I am and to just let me be. Like, I was the one that was like unique and like running out by myself elsewhere. And like, I'd come back and be fine. Right. And so that's kind of like what she was saying. So, I had that role, but then also uniquely, I think all of us learned probably from the like pretty rich foundation of Christianity in our home of like people pleasing, right? Like we still have to please our parents. My dad is also from Trinidad, so this like very clear West Indian culture of an immigrant parent who has worked so hard to get to the United States, and then you have to like make them not only proud, but like you have to do so much better because they've sacrificed everything for you to have that. And so there was really just this like need for me to also make sure people were happy with me, and so this like rebellious people pleaser, that can be things that like that can feel like an oxymoron often. Internally, I'm like, I don't want to do that. But then I'm like, but it's something that I guess will make my mom proud or happy or whatever. So I'm just going to do it. But I would also do it in silence. I used to sing and I would be in the choir and I would have a solo and I would like not tell her that I have a solo so that, just all of a sudden I'm just singing by myself. And she's like, oh, that's my daughter. Hope you're paying attention. And
I love that very like sly way of being like, you
yep.
should have known.
You should have known. And if you missed it, you missed it. I'm not telling you about it. This whole like, operating in silence and moving in silence is just the rebellious part of me. But also you're going to be pleased because I'm going to do it to perfection. So yeah, there's a lot that comes out from that. I think now I feel like there should be always space for me to just be like, no, that's not it. Or like, social issues, I will talk about them all the time, and I will talk about them in ways that like I'm not necessarily concerned about what the perception is, but I am also going to make sure that I do consistent research to know what I'm talking about so that there's not much displeasure, at least in my level of understanding and knowledge about something. And so, I'm challenging the people pleaser in me to also like create boundaries because that's hard, as we come home and go home, which is where we're going next.
Yes. It's a whole different ball game to have to put it into practice. And I mean, I think what's interesting is right, we can recognize it. It's easy to recognize it even when we're away, right? Like when I was in LA, and I'm sure when you were in Atlanta, you were like, okay, I'm starting to understand where these things came from. But I think it's like, it's a whole different thing to actually then be put back in the situation of being with your family and then have to like do something about it. I find that to be very, very difficult.
Absolutely. When you're actually like growing as an adult, like these are very important developmental years that you were in LA, I was in Atlanta. And so you're like developing by yourself, you're creating your own way of being, you're challenging patterns, but also thinking about what will, kind of make, in my case, what will make my parents happy and proud and like have them feel as though all the work that they put into me is, now that I'm on my own is something for them to be proud of. And I think that there was so much work around like, what is it like to make myself proud, and
Mhm.
doing that work for such a long time, and then coming back into a space where the expectation of you pleasing other people is still there. And like, doing for other people, that expectation is there. It'd be hard for you to for your for you to be like to your brother, oh no, I'm not doing that, you got it,
No.
as you're acknowledging your own boundaries.
It's like I like, he was just here for a little bit, and the welcome basket that I made for him and each of his children, like it's like I'm like, please like me. Here's your favorite candy. I know your favorite candy. Oh,
Right.
here's this. I know that you're gonna want this. You're coming in from like a long drive. You're gonna want a face mask. I know what kind of drinks that you like. I have the fridge stocked with them. It's like, calm down, Rachel. Like he
So
can like
although a
uh,
welcome basket, like where is he going to get a welcome basket?
Oh, it's true. Here's one of the things that I've noticed though is that I think, even with choosing Warren as a partner, and I've even talked, I think, on another deep episode about how Warren anticipates my needs. And I think what I was drawn to in a partner is someone who could do that for me. It's not
Yes.
like I sit around like waiting for someone to make me a welcome basket, but it is something that when that happens, like I just went on a trip with my girlfriends to Portland, and Jenny was kind of the main person who was planning the whole thing. And the attention that she put in to making the trip nice for everybody
Mm,
meant so much to me on a deep level. It honestly like lets my shoulders relax of
ooh,
like, you don't have to like do
right.
this, like, but someone else is doing it for you, which is the same thing that my brother and my family would all do too. They would be able to handle
Mm.
their own stuff, but the fact that I step in and do it for them, like it almost like takes away their ability to like do it for themselves, right?
Yes, and for you to also like learn how to like, regulate yourself in the times where maybe they aren't actually taking care of themselves or, getting their needs met. And you could actually do something to, do it for them or make it better. And that self-regulation, I feel like is like the hard part, because your nervous system is like, if you just do it, if you just go that extra mile for this welcome
Mm-hmm.
basket,
Mm-hmm.
they will feel relaxed and welcome and all of those things. But if you stop yourself from doing that, you then have to take care of what's left.
That's right. Oh, that's powerful too. Yeah, that's powerful.
So it seems like we give a lot of power to family systems. Like, we just talked about our families of origin. I think that there is so much power and connection to like what our experiences were in our family of origin, and then what we seek in, whether it be
Mhm.
partners or, chosen family. And so that amount of power, I do think gets like, reiterated in like relationship therapy, like therapy that is focused in family systems or relational connections. Why do you think that there is such power that we give to family systems? And like, why is it hard to break those patterns? Like, why is it hard for you to break these patterns?
Yeah. Well, I think similar to like some of the stuff that we touched on during the mom shit episode, like I think there is a lot of like, I don't know, what's the word? Maybe enmeshment, but maybe like mirroring that happens within a family system of like, it's very difficult for me to see this unhealthy pattern when I'm with my family, because it works. Like, even even when it's like doesn't make sense, and from like an objective point of view, I can come back home and be like, oh, that's what was happening there, and this is how it led me to choose Warren. Those kinds of things, when I'm just there and in it, I notice it as like needing to caretake my sister, you know, at the expense of my husband. Meaning, like, I know how to step in there and give my sister exactly what she needs. Warren doesn't, and he doesn't really care to, right? It's like,
Right.
so he comes in and he is just like his full self. And I'm like, no, you can't do it like that. You have to do, this is what we do around Becca
Right.
to make sure that she has everything that she needs, you know? So
Yeah.
there's this like conflict that I think comes up of like, this is how you play the role. And if you don't know how to play the role like that, because maybe I've grown past that a little bit in my adult life outside of the family, when I come back into it, it's very, those two things become in big time conflict.
Hmm. Yeah, I would agree. I
Yeah.
even think that there's like, these patterns, we've learned it in some of the most like impressionable parts of our lives.
Hmm.
We developmentally, before the age of 25, our brains are underdeveloped. So we are like so used to a pattern, and that gets like, that's encoded basically in our DNA and how we look at the world. And so then everything after that, anytime where you move or anytime where you go to a different environment, it's so hard to challenge what we feel is so deeply part of who we are. It's like challenging things that we acknowledge might not be the best for us, but the process of doing something different and like, getting everybody on board with what's different is, including ourselves, is almost harder than just like, going with what is.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's almost like the way that you're raised, you feel like this is like maybe the right way, or like before you know better, right? It's like, okay, well, this is the way that we do things. So then when other things start to kind of come in conflict to that, I actually remember when I was in college, I had a Bible professor that I loved, Dr. Magnus, and I was going to go to an internship at this very, 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 very conservative kind of organization. And I remember him telling me, like, don't, he was surprised that I was going to such a conservative organization for my internship. And he was like, you don't believe everything that you learn out there, or hear out there. And I was like, what? There's only one way to believe, right? Like, all Christians are exactly the same, right? And he's like, no, like, there are many different ways that, religious traditions treat lots of different topics, particularly even thinking about like, LGBTQ type issues. This organization would have took a very conservative and harmful approach to that. Whereas there's many churches that, and I just felt like that introduction of like, things are not black and white. It's not this or this. There's a lot of gray here, and I think that that showed up in my family life as well, as I started to like incorporate back into the gray into like a very black and white understanding of things, which
Yeah.
I don't even think that's just a strictly religious thing. I think that that can happen in any situation where you grow up thinking like, this is right and wrong, or good and bad, this is what we do or what we don't do, and then you begin to like enter in these elements that counteract that.
Yeah, definitely. I think that there's even times where we, when we actually have other influences or even want to do something different or recreate, a part of who we are, that there's such this pull of this is actually wrong because this is what I've learned. If it's something different than what, I learned at home, then it's wrong. And so why do I want something that's wrong?
Yeah.
It's really a part of development that can be really confusing, actually.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes. So you just moved closer to home, and I'm curious, how's that been? What's that been like for you? Like, are you noticing any old patterns?
Oh, 100%. The first example that the thing is that I didn't actually expect that there would be this like going home effect of like,
Mhm.
you know, everyone expecting me to get back into the same patterns. So, we drove from Georgia, and I'm used to just my personality wise doing things by myself. Like I said,
Mhm.
I have a solo. I've been practicing this. You're not going to know until day of. Same thing with
Mhm.
moving. It's a whole process. When I get there, I'll let you know when I'm there, right? And that's been okay for the time that I've been out of everybody's like, immediate proximity. Basically, as soon as we crossed into Maryland, I'm getting like calls and texts, and like I'm like, what is wrong? What's going on? So I listened to my mom's voicemail because she left a few of them, and she's like, everyone's asking, are you here yet? And I'm like, I no, number one, I'm not here yet. Number two, I'll let you know when I get there. It wasn't even about like, are you guys okay? How's the drive been? Haven't
Mhm.
heard from anybody until we're supposed to be there. And now we want to know where you are. We want to know, yes, it is about my safety, but it was also about, are you here yet?
Yeah.
Everybody wants to know. I'm talking, my godmother wants to know. And all these people that I didn't even know knew that I was, even driving in that day. So definitely this like, shift of, like I said, for 17 years, I'm in therapy. I'm learning, how to create boundaries. I'm learning, that, for example, if somebody does something wrong in my family, if I have to grieve the loss of what I expected a person to be, as we talked about in Mom Shit, that I don't necessarily need that person to acknowledge what they did wrong in order for me to forgive them and move on, right? But I don't have to sit in the pain that's there. So I'm like, I'm untouchable here from all of these patterns. And I get here and I am not actually untouchable. And they're touching me in every way. And it is it's an emotional process because I expected to not be experiencing some of these things, some of the
Mhm.
disappointments of like, I'm different. I've come back here different because if you didn't know, 17 years just went by, right?
Mhm.
And so, yes, I'm going to come to family events, but I'm going to choose which ones I come to because that's my decision. I have a family that we are recreating our own, traditions. The expectation come Thanksgiving is going to be that I, go and celebrate in the same ways. I've recreated the way that we celebrate Thanksgiving or that we acknowledge,
Mhm.
that Thursday that we have off. So, it is it's disheartening. But I also think that what I've learned, even as I'm talking about it now, what I've learned is, the amount of growth that was there. And, not only the need for continued therapy, but that the self work and like the self awareness
Mhm.
that this, like, it's just disappointment, right? Like I've changed so much, and that changed person has to create a new space
Yep.
at home. And
Yep.
it's been pretty like disappointing up until probably like the last couple of weeks where I'm like, it's okay. I can manage that disappointment. I can
Mhm.
manage other people's expectations of me being who I was, but also still show up as I am and not have to explain anything.
I mean, I think that's like so beautiful and brave of you too, because it's like, it would be the easier thing to just avoid it and be like staying away, can't handle it. And I honestly have empathy for people who choose to do that as well. It's not necessarily like the bad decision. I mean,
Sure.
I should have even mentioned in the whole going home again thing that it's not recommended for people who have traumatic childhoods or anything like that to revisit that, right? But I think the ability to like re-engage and wrestle with those pieces that might cause people to do, like, I think there's people who go home and drink a little too much because they're kind of coping with an unhealthy pattern that they don't want to deal with, or maybe lash out and like leave, and all of those things are honestly like super valid. They're
Yeah,
all different ways to cope with a very stressful situation.
definitely.
So I
Definitely.
think you creating that room for the disappointment it's a great thing to just acknowledge it and be able to
Yeah.
move through it.
Don't get me wrong, I'm also leaving too. Like
Yeah.
I will also leave. Like I
Yes. Right.
live
And
down the
drinking.
street now.
I'm just kidding.
I mean that too. Like I'm leaving and, I'm
Yes.
going to, do something to cope.
I love that. I love that.
So I'm going to ask you a question about when you're away from home. Especially when you leave your childhood home. I know you go there, pretty often, and there's also like a drive. So like when you're, I always think about drives being like these places where you can like think. But we seem to have so many more spaces to learn about ourselves without the influence and expectations of the role of in our family. Did you
Mhm.
notice that when you went to college or went to LA, or even now when you leave, northern Georgia,
Mhm.
from when you're with family?
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting to hear you talk about just even your journey of driving to Maryland and like, I love like your approach of like the solo in church of like just like I'm going to show up and they're not even going to know that I'm here and I will choose when I do this thing where I have really unrealistic expectations. So when I was moving home from California to Georgia in 2011, I mean, I wrote pages and pages and lists of how amazing my life was going to be. Like I kind of look for the antithesis of like whatever it is. So in LA, there was a lot of great things about LA, but in my last like year there, I was only focusing on the things that weren't there, like green grass, like
Mm-hmm.
seasons, just space. So I started dreaming about like homesteading. I don't know why. I've never owned a chicken or a pig or anything like that. But in my mind, I was going to go home and
Yes.
have like a little farmhouse. What? I don't know. Chickens are like disgusting. And I also moved into a place where like chickens were like you couldn't even have them within the city limit. But in my mind, it was going to be beautiful, and we were going to have like there will be a text thread in just a couple of months between me and my sister and my mom beginning to plan Christmas. And it's like we get so excited about it to the point that like no Christmas, like it could ever amount to like what in my head I build it up to be. So
Mhm.
then there's this major letdown and disappointment because it's never what it is, right? Like it's just not what it is in my head. So I had to experience that, and I still experience that every time we go home. I mean, my niece Ava, she will call me. She'll build one of those chain link construction paper things for
Right.
every single day that I'm coming home. What we're gonna do? She builds out an itinerary. She's just like me, unfortunately, poor thing. But like I think it's gonna be this like amazing thing, and then it's not. It's fine, but it's real life. People
Yeah.
get tired, the kids get
Right.
cranky. I get
Mhm.
tired of sitting around and talking about stuff. I'm not sleeping in my own bed. Like there's a million other elements that make it just like not controlled my
Mhm.
own space. And those are all the things that I think start to come up for me. So how I'm trying to begin to deal with that is to like I remember hearing once that like unrealistic expectations is the precursor for resentment, right? It's like if we have these expectations that nobody could ever meet, right? Then like later it's going to be hard. You're going to start to like resent things. I'm going to resent them that they didn't notice this about me or they didn't ask about this or all of that sort of stuff. I was actually just talking to my sister-in-law about this, Hannah, who my brother and my sister-in-law have just moved from Sacramento where they lived for 8 years to Knoxville, and we were talking about like my unrealistic expectations for things, and she is like the complete opposite. She's like, this is gonna be horrible. I'm moving back home and it's gonna be awful. So for her, it's like anything that happens is like a pleasant surprise.
Right.
Whereas, like, so I'm trying to implement a little bit more just realness of you remember that after the third day, you start to get tired. Like,
Mm.
how can you plan your trip with those kinds of things in mind? Um, that's what I'm trying to do.
That.
Yeah.
I like that. And even to the point in the intervention of going home,
Mhm.
it's this, having to sit with even the disappointment, right? So having the expectation that you're going to experience disappointment because, the next time you go, there's not going to be this like overnight change where you have absolutely no expectations and everything is a great surprise. There's going to still be expectations. There's still going to be disappointment, and before it shifts to resentment, being able to sit with that knowledge that this is going on and maybe even institute some things to help you
Yeah.
and care for you, you know, and maybe even focus some attention on you versus, you know, kind of the tendency to focus on everybody else.
Absolutely. I think so. I mean, I think that's the work of going home again, right? And it's the kind of work that we don't have to put in when we are in situations where we can control with like friends or, that kind of stuff. There it's just like easier. The
Right.
amount of stuff doesn't come up in the same sort of way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
So maybe we can talk a little bit about some of the tools that people can utilize. There might be some people who are listening to this thinking like, oh yeah, I relate to some of those feelings and whatever role you might play. There's got to be something that individuals can use. So I'm wondering, any tools you're thinking of top of
Yeah.
mind?
Yeah, so I think, you know, the first one that comes to mind is, you know, just kind of the ability to make sure that you have like space and time to yourself.
Mhm.
And you know, being able to sit with yourself, whatever kind of environment you need to like make sure you're connected to what's going on, you know, in your thoughts, what's going
Mhm.
on for you emotionally, what's your body doing, what is this situation, you know, in how is it impacting you. And I think, you know, being able to make sure that you acknowledge those expectations are really important, but then when your, you know, nervous system is doing the thing that it does, when you feel disappointment or when resentment comes up or when you acknowledge that change hasn't occurred in the ways that you thought that it did or the way that it did for you, to create for yourself some, you know, ways of taking care of
Mhm.
yourself. For
Mhm.
me, that is space by myself. That is space, you know, whether it be outside, whether it be, you know, laying in bed, it's either one of those two. You know, being able to say like I need to be by myself and I need to take care of what I know is happening, because if I let this go on for the, you know, whole trip, then I know where this is going.
Yeah.
And maybe everybody else knows where this is going because this is an old pattern, and you
Mhm.
know, let's figure out a way to do something different. What about you? What are some
I
tools?
like that a lot. Actually, one of the thoughts it brought up for me is like that an old family system idea that changing any one member of the system has an effect on the whole entire system. So if you're in a situation where you want to go to couples counseling and your partner doesn't want to go, and you might just be like, all right, cool, well, they won't go, so we're not going. But actually what family therapists would say is you coming by yourself is going to impact that couple system. It's you're going to be able to do some work on yourself, which is where your only power lies
Mhm.
oftentimes. I mean, what I was thinking about in terms of thinking of some of these tools, what's interesting about it is that none of it has to do with changing the other person. It's not possible, right? Yeah, we can't get our other family members to act in a different way. All we can do is control and pay attention to how we are. So one of the things I put was learning how to assume a neutral emotional position. For me, that looks like, managing my expectations of how perfect I think it will be. And maybe even like as I'm writing a list on my phone of all the things that I want to do with my sister or my niece or my nephew or whoever, I also maybe write another list of the things that I know are going to be hard or that have proven to be disappointing in the past, just so that I can remember it's not going to be all roses. There is going to be some element of this that's also hard. And just, maybe that will allow me to show up and be comfortable with holding both of those things at the same time. I think also expressing your differences without attacking, defending, withdrawing, or expecting family members to agree with us. I think that I have a way of talking, especially to my mom. I talked about this on my mom's show, where it's like, I'm right and I need to convince you why you are wrong, and really like she doesn't have to agree with me. She doesn't have to ever agree with me, right? It's not necessarily that my way is also always right. I think it's right because I chose it, but it might not be right for her, So being able to express my differences without expectations that she's going to agree. And then the last one that I would offer is just like recognizing your power to redefine home. I saw a quote from Maya Angelou that talks about like home is like a soft place to land, right? And I think that when some people think about home, a soft place to land might not be how they would describe it. So, what does a soft place to land look like for you? And how can you incorporate that into your life if it's not home? Anyways, I went on for too long. You tell me what you think.
No, that was great. I think even like one of the places where there's overlap is, defining your boundaries. And, that can be really hard when you are going into systems. I think the part that like, is added when you say like, come to therapy anyway, even if your partner or your family is not interested in coming. The additional part is that there's going to be a hole left with the role that you used to play, right?
Yeah.
So as the person who is consistently like, well, let's rethink this, or that can't be right, or like rebelling against what the status quo is. If I'm not doing that because I feel like it's taking on too much labor, or I just don't feel like doing that in the moment, or, whatever the case is, then there's still going to be a need that is there's because the family is still so embedded in what's called homeostasis is, what their normal is. And so if we are changing, if there's one person in the system that's changing, then it becomes harder to actually have boundaries around those changes so that you can reap the benefits of having emotional boundaries, or acknowledging that, I actually don't really want to be invested in being the one that tells us that there's a different way to think about this, or there's a different way to do this. Or, I don't need to be people pleasing. I don't necessarily care what that person thinks of me. And so having to have boundaries in that is the hardest part, I think, for me. When I say something like, no, I'm not going to go during my, 2-day visit. I'm not going to go visit with people that I don't like simply because it will bring them pleasure. I'm not going to do that. I'm 40 years old. No.
Yes.
I have to actually sit with my no and acknowledge the benefits of like, why am I saying no to this? And the displeasure, right?
Mm-hmm.
Carla didn't come visit, or, what does it mean that Carla didn't come visit? And now, for my mom, she's got to go by herself, or she can't go either. Like there's just so many implications, and the responsibility doesn't end with making that change. There's also how do you maintain that change as well.
Love that. I love that. That's real. I think that too, that tool in and of itself that we're talking about there is also a total anecdote. Anecdote, I feel like is not the right word, but like it's like a way to combat our people pleasing.
Oh yeah.
Right? It's like, this is a healthy tool, but it's also making me have to do something that's super. I remember Mike, my co-founder, telling me once, he was like, if we're successful with Motivo, there are going to be people who don't like you. And I'm like, that's going to be hard for me. I'm like, what do you mean? I can send them a welcome basket. Will that be helpful? But like, I think that ability to kind of wrestle with that and be able to say that's okay in my head, like that's the kind of word that I tell myself, like, this is going to disappoint such and such person, or this is going to make such and such person not happy with me. And that's okay. Right. That's okay. Like that is theirs to feel. Right.
Yeah, that is okay. I think that like, something that, can be learned also from Mike, and the way that the two of you kind of like, work together there. I think also, Shannon, my husband, also has this where it's just like, back to the control. I don't have control over whether or not somebody likes me. Nobody. Even if you take care of their needs, they could still decide they don't like you.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, then you're going to be exerting all of this energy to make them like you, and then they still get the choice. So what would it be like to just kind of like acknowledge from the beginning, not everybody's going to like you. So what would it mean to not operate with the priority of pleasing people, but more so, in our case, delivering a good product, or, being happy and joyful and experiencing a life where you get to be fulfilled and be happy. That's like the greatest challenge that there is, and the best way to like prioritize, your own pleasure over other people's pleasure. Choose not to like you or whatever.
Those are some powerful words.
They are.
Yeah.
In our conversation.
I love this. I could actually go on and on and on about this, but I feel like we're getting to the end here. So, so maybe we'll wrap it up, and maybe you could tee up next week's for us.
I am ready. I also think that we could go on forever, but then I just looked at the time, so we will not. So next week, the title of our conversation is Not So Microaggressions. I think that this really does come from the narrative that's come out of the most recent Supreme Court decision to roll back affirmative action based in race, and the narrative that even, was created on what affirmative action even is and how that has impacted people of color, especially Black people. And so, we're actually going to talk less about what microaggressions are. I think that, there's enough content out there for that, but also the human impact of microaggressions. So if someone is on the receiving end of microaggressions, the trauma that then creates, and the ways that shows up. And what I like about, our plans for this conversation is, this is something that helps us rethink bias and microaggressions in really important ways, because there's a human element. If there's a human being on the opposite end of our words, or just these things that we just flippantly say, then, maybe we'll think about it a little bit, differently, and like actually speak from a place of knowledge and, other people's humanity. So yeah, that's what we're going to talk about. Looking forward to it.
I am too. I really am. I think that's going to be an important conversation to dig into, and we hope that you guys will join us. So we are doing live on YouTube still, usually on Wednesdays at 12 p.m. Sometimes we'll adjust that a little bit, but we're always sending this to Spotify and Apple Podcasts and Stitcher. And if you want to watch it there, then that is perfect as well. If you want to get the video element, you can watch it on YouTube. I like the video element as well. So good to see you as always. And yeah.
It's the highlight of my week.
It is, honestly, for me as well. I'm like, all right, I'm just going to go chat with my good friend Carla. It'll be awesome. Okay.
I love it.
Awesome. All right. See you next time. Bye.